Somewhere between the bottom of a Great Lake and the top of a real estate listing you forgot to close, there are towns in Michigan that most of America drove past once and never looked back. Small towns, quiet towns, towns where the main street has more history than foot traffic and the housing market looks like a misprint. We're talking places where you can buy a house for less than a decent used truck, where the neighbors wave even when they don't know your name yet, and where the word rush hour refers to that one school bus that shows up at 7:40. These places didn't disappear. They just got left behind by a country that decided bigger always means better. This video is about 15 of them and why the story those empty storefronts are telling might be worth listening to. Michigan itself is a state that gets underestimated constantly. 2 peninsulas, 4 of the 5 Great Lakes touching its borders, more freshwater coastline than any other state in the continental United States. The Upper Peninsula alone is bigger than Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Delaware combined, and parts of it feel like a national park that nobody officially named. But inside that geographic wealth, there are communities that have been emptying out for decades, driven by factory closures, agricultural shifts, and the general gravitational pull of cities that promised more. What those cities didn't always deliver was affordable housing, a yard with actual space, and a neighbor you could name. These 15 towns did, and still do, even when nobody was paying attention. Mio sits in the middle of the Lower Peninsula in Oscoda County, and it holds the somewhat unusual distinction of being the county seat of the least densely populated county in the entire Lower Peninsula. That is not a real estate slogan you see often, but it should be. The town proper has around 1,700 people, surrounded by national forest in every direction, and the Au River running through it like a geographic apology for everything the rest of the country got wrong. Median home prices hover around $90,000 to $120,000, depending on the year and the listing. And for that money, you are getting homes with actual acreage, not the symbolic strip of grass that passes for a yard in most American cities. The Au River is one of the most celebrated trout rivers in the Midwest, which means Mio has a quiet economic engine that doesn't make headlines but keeps certain people very happy. The trade-off is real. The nearest Walmart is over an hour away. Healthcare infrastructure is thin, and if you're wired for city speed everything, the silence will hit you like a wall. But if you've been looking at the cost of your current mortgage and feeling like something in the math simply doesn't add up, Mio has numbers that do. West Branch, about 30 miles south of Mio in Ogham County, has a little more infrastructure and a little more bustle, which, in this part of Michigan, means a stoplight and a Tim Hortons. The population sits around 2,000 people, and the town has been steadily adapting to its new economic reality after the manufacturing closures of previous decades. What it still offers is a genuine 4-season outdoor lifestyle, proximity to snowmobile trails that make the entire region an attraction from November through March, and a real estate market where 3-bedroom homes with garages regularly list under $130,000. West Branch also has one of those small-town main streets that's partly a relic and partly a comeback, with independent businesses keeping the lights on. The school system is small by design but functional, and the community has the kind of institutional memory that makes local government actually responsive to the people living there. The downsides include limited employment options for working-age residents who are either self-employed or remote, and healthcare access requires planning, not spontaneity. Moving into the Upper Peninsula changes the calculus entirely. Newberry is a village in Luce County with a population under 1,500, and it has one of the more striking natural environments of any community this size anywhere in the country. It sits about 30 miles from Tequamanon Falls, one of the largest waterfalls east of the Mississippi, which means every spring and fall the area fills briefly with visitors who would genuinely consider living there if they thought it was an option. It is an option. Median home values in Newberry tend to run between $75,000 and $110,000, and for that price, you are buying into a community that borders state forest, has a functioning hospital for its size, and sits within reasonable driving distance of Lake Superior's southern shore. The challenge with Newberry is the winter. The Upper Peninsula receives snowfall totals that make Minneapolis feel Mediterranean, and extended power outages during blizzard season are not hypothetical concerns, but seasonal realities. You adapt or you don't, and the people who stay have mostly decided that the trade-off is worth it.
Ontonagon sits on the coast of Lake Superior at the western end of the Upper Peninsula, and it is a town that peaked sometime in the mid-20th century and has been renegotiating its identity ever since. The population has fallen to around 1,400, and the main employer that once kept the town running has long since closed. What remains is extraordinary in ways that don't appear in economic reports. Ontonagon is positioned near the Porcupine Mountains Wilderness State Park, one of the finest pieces of undeveloped land in the Midwest, featuring ancient old-growth forest and interior lakes that look like something a painter made up. Housing in Ontonagon regularly lists under $80,000, and waterfront properties on Lake Superior exist here at prices that would buy you a parking space in markets like Seattle or Boston. The difficulties are significant. Employment options are scarce, the town's hospital situation has been complicated by regional consolidation, and the geographic isolation in winter is not a metaphor. If you have a remote income stream, a flexible schedule, and a high tolerance for self-sufficiency, Ontonagon offers something genuinely rare. Baraga sits on the Keweenaw Bay of Lake Superior, part of the Keweenaw Peninsula, and benefits from the slight moderation the bay provides during winter compared to the open lakeshore communities further west. The town has around 1,800 residents and sits at the edge of the Keweenaw Bay Indian Communities Reservation, which has brought some economic activity to the region through the nearby casino and related businesses. The affordable housing market here is consistent, with median prices well under $120,000, and the scenery is the kind that keeps photographers coming back in every season. Baraga has a small-town infrastructure that works, including a school district that punches above its weight and a waterfront that makes summer evenings feel like something a travel magazine would photograph and then lose in a file somewhere. Back in the Lower Peninsula, Manton in Wexford County is a town of about 1,200 people that sits in the northern half of the Lower Peninsula between Cadillac and Traverse City, which means it exists in the economic shadow of two communities that get all the attention while offering a fraction of the price. Median home values in Manton have been tracked as low as $85,000, and the town has maintained enough civic function to keep a school, a library, and a handful of restaurants operating. The proximity to Cadillac, about 20 minutes south, gives Manton residents access to larger retail and health care without paying Cadillac property taxes. The town itself is surrounded by public land, rivers, and lakes that make the outdoor recreation argument easy. What it doesn't have is a robust local economy beyond the basics, and anyone moving here for employment rather than retirement or remote work will be commuting. Rogers City in Presque-Isle County is one of the more interesting cases on this list because it has something most small towns don't, a genuine operational economy. Rogers City is home to one of the largest limestone quarries in the world, the calcite plant operated by Carmus, which means there is actual industrial employment here that isn't a rumor from the 1970s. The town has around 2,700 people, sits on the northern shore of Lake Huron, and has a waterfront that the town has done a reasonably good job of keeping accessible and functional. Median home prices hover in the $100,000 to $140,000 range, and for that money, you get a community that has maintained more services than comparably sized towns in the region, including a hospital, a decent school system, and a marina that makes Lake Huron genuinely usable. Rogers City is not dramatic. It does not have a mountain backdrop or a cultural district, but it is a town that still functions as a town, and that is rarer than it should be.
Grayling sits in Crawford County in the northern lower Michigan Peninsula and straddles the line between near-empty and genuinely functional more gracefully than most. The population is around 1,800, and the town has built a service economy around its position as a gateway to the Aux River, Hartwick Pines State Park, and the surrounding national forest. What this means practically is that Grayling has more dining options, more retail, and more lodging than its population alone would justify, because it is also serving seasonal visitors. Median home prices in Grayling tend to run between $110,000 and $160,000, which is still dramatically below the national median, and the town has maintained a real Main Street presence, including an independent bookstore that, against all logic, is still open. The risk with Grayling is economic seasonality. The town's service economy breathes with the tourism calendar, and that dependence on visitors creates instability that a pure manufacturing economy, however fragile, does not have. Across the line into the Upper Peninsula, Iron River in Iron County is a former mining town that peaked during the iron ore boom of the early 20th century and has spent the decades since figuring out what comes next. The population is around 2,700, and Iron River still has the bones of a real town, a hospital, a school system, civic institutions, and a downtown that has seen better days but has not fully surrendered. Median home prices are consistently below $100,000, and in some cases, well below. The area surrounding Iron River includes major snowmobile trails, fishing lakes, and hunting territory that attract a seasonal population of outdoor users, which gives local businesses just enough winter traffic to matter. Iron River is also close enough to Wisconsin's border that it functions as a borderland community in terms of culture and commerce, which gives residents a slightly wider orbit than the population alone would suggest. The job market is the honest challenge. Without mining, the primary employers are healthcare, government, and retail, and none of them are growing. Bessemer, at the far western edge of the Upper Peninsula in Geographic County, is a town of around 1,800 people with a ski resort, Big Powderhorn Mountain, close enough to be a functional employer and tourist draw. The presence of downhill skiing changes the economic equation enough to notice. Bessemer has maintained a small but active business district and housing prices that regularly come in under $90,000 for full homes with yards and garages. The western Upper Peninsula gets some of the heaviest snowfall in the Great Lakes region, and Bessemer sits in that corridor, which is simultaneously the town's economic asset and its logistical challenge. If you ski or snowmobile, the winter is the point. If you don't, it is 8 months of renegotiation. Curiously, Munising, on the southern shore of Lake Superior in Alger County, has become one of the more talked-about small towns in Michigan in recent years because of the Pictured Rocks National Lake Shore that begins essentially at the edge of town. The population is around 2,100, and Munising has been navigating a delicate balance between its role as a gateway tourism community and the economic realities of a small, remote town. Housing prices have crept upward compared to some of the other towns on this list, but are still routinely in the $130,000 to $180,000 range, which in absolute terms remains dramatically affordable. The town has a hospital, a school, and enough visitor infrastructure to keep restaurants and shops alive year-round. The risk is that tourism-driven affordability is fragile, and the very attention that makes Munising appealing also drives the kind of speculative buying that can price out the people who already live there.
Ironwood sits at the absolute western tip of the Upper Peninsula on the Wisconsin border, and it is a town that has been contracting for decades from a mining peak that it will never return to. The population is around 4,700, which makes it one of the larger entries on this list, but the surrounding economic context and the trajectory of the town put it firmly in this conversation. Ironwood has a historic downtown district that has been partially revitalized by arts organizations and small business owners who recognized cheap commercial space as an opportunity. Median home prices in Ironwood regularly land below $90,000 and occasionally significantly below that for properties that need work. The town's proximity to the geographic County Airport and its position near major snowmobile trail networks have kept some economic circulation going. The long-term demographic trend is downward, which is the honest fact that any prospective resident has to look directly at before deciding what to do with it. Posen is a village in Presque-Isle County with a population that has been under 300 for years, and it is on this list precisely because it represents something the others approach but Posen arrives at completely. A community so small that its entire civic function depends on a handful of families deciding to stay. Posen built its identity around the potato harvest, hosting an annual festival that still draws visitors from across northern Michigan. Median home prices, where transactions occur at all, tend to be among the lowest in the state, regularly under $70,000. For someone who genuinely wants the full weight of small-town rural life, Posen is unfiltered. There is no tourist economy to buffer the slow seasons, no regional employment anchor within reasonable commuting distance, and no illusion about what the population trajectory looks like. What there is, for the people who remain, is the specific kind of community cohesion that only forms when a place is small enough that everyone's presence is felt. Germfask sits in Schoolcraft County in the central Upper Peninsula and has a population that rarely exceeds 200. It sits near the Seney National Wildlife Refuge, one of the largest wetland refuges in the eastern United States, and the town has more wildlife within 3 miles than most American cities have in their entire metropolitan area. Houses in Germfask are so infrequently listed that market data is thin, but when they do move, prices are almost always under $65,000 for full residential properties. The infrastructure reality is stark. The nearest hospital is in Newberry, about 40 minutes east, and Germfask has no commercial presence to speak of. What it has is quiet. A specific and profound version of it, land that hasn't been rearranged for human convenience, and a cost of living that is genuinely structurally low, not because the area is growing and the market hasn't caught up, but because the market has simply moved on and left the doors unlocked. The pattern across all 15 of these towns is not mysterious. Michigan's deindustrialization, the collapse of the copper and iron mining economies of the Upper Peninsula, the agricultural mechanization that took farm labor away, and the downstream effect of Detroit's long contraction all contributed to communities that lost the economic argument and never fully recovered. What they retained was the land, the water, the infrastructure built during better decades, and the people who chose to stay or couldn't leave and eventually stopped wanting to. The housing prices in these places are not a secret. They appear on the same listing sites that show you properties in Phoenix and Austin. The barrier is not information. It is the psychological difficulty of living somewhere that your culture has decided is left behind. But the definition of left behind is doing a lot of work in that framing. Left behind by what? By housing costs that have made ownership inaccessible for a significant portion of the American population. By traffic patterns that have turned the commute into a lifestyle. By neighborhoods where you genuinely do not know the name of the person who lives 30 feet from your wall. The towns on this list are quiet by choice and by circumstance, and the difference between the two is something that each person has to work out for themselves. What the numbers show is that affordability of this magnitude, houses in the 5 figures and low 6 figures, fresh water within walking distance, and enough seasonal beauty to forget what you were anxious about, is still available. It is available right now, in towns that are still there, waiting to find out whether the next chapter will be written by someone who finally stopped looking for a better deal and realized they'd been sitting on one the whole time.